This tradition of the Kirkin of the Tartan recalls an era when the powerful within Scotland and England abused that power, moved crofters off their land, forbade the speaking of Gaelic, the playing of the pipes, and the wearing of the tartan as a means of controlling a people. The era that spanned well over 2 centuries is memorable because of its heartlessness. The rich got richer, the poor got booted off their meager farms. And when Martin emailed me, Martin's on the piano, said, "What's the theme of the Kirkin of the Tartan this year, Lynne?" I said, "It's the same theme that it always is, Martin." To the British. And while the Highlanders were a feisty bunch, I'm sure I have some of that blood, they didn't think twice about defying those in power, and they were prepared to get creative about it. Hiding pieces of tartan under their clothing, speaking Gaelic in the shadows, playing the pipes on the hillside. Many of them were not only forced off their land, but very often had no choice but to seek refuge in countries like Canada and New Zealand and Australia. And so it is this Sunday every year when it is my task to remind us that the gospel has both a political and an economic implication. That central to both the Jewish and the Christian tradition is a vision for a healthy relationship between peoples and a healthy relationship between people and the land. It is clear that during the period of the Highland clearances, those in charge were concerned with neither. They would have done well to remember these passages in Leviticus that speak of a restoration of right relationship, restoration of balance. They would have done well to remember the practice of Jubilee, that recognizing that at some point the human propensity towards greed or progress will always produce victims. So that in the end, some places in the world end up looking like really bad Monopoly games, whereby someone has put hotels on Boardwalk and Park Place, and every other sucker around the table goes bankrupt trying to pay the rent. And so think about it. Think about the practice of reversing that trend every 49 years. Some of you are shorter, so I'll go up here. We wouldn't be kicking hundreds of Scottish crofters off the land and replacing them with thousands of sheep. We would be holding fast to a very different set of values if we took seriously the biblical vision that put in place a theological and an agricultural safety net to ensure that at the end of the day, everyone had their own piece of land, which in an agrarian economy meant a means of feeding themselves. Now, I imagine that some of you are thinking, pipe dream, that is impossible. How on earth would that work? But how about this story? On a December afternoon, Frances Amy Richardson took a breath from her quilting class to reflect on a groundbreaking experiment she took part in 40 years earlier. Between 1974 and 1979, residents of Dauphin, Manitoba were selected to be subjects in a project that ensured basic annual income for everyone. For 5 years, monthly checks were delivered to the poorest residents of Dauphin, Manitoba. No strings attached. And for 5 years in that community, poverty was completely eliminated. The program was dubbed Mincome because it was determined to provide each family with a minimum income. And it was the first of its kind in North America. It stood out from similar American projects at the time because it didn't shut out seniors and the disabled from qualification. The project's original intent was to evaluate if giving checks to the working poor enough to top up their incomes to a living wage would kill people's motivation to work. They just stay home then, because they're lazy. But they didn't. Both Frances and her husband worked, but they had meager incomes that supported 6 kids as well as her mother. Mincome provided them with financial predictability and a sense of stability. There was always food on the table. The bills were always paid. The kids stayed in school. The parents stopped fighting. And the stress in the household went down. And when her husband's health took a turn for the worse midway through the pilot project, the family still made ends meet. And then a provincial election brought a new party in, and that was the end of that. It was a success story, but once a new government came into power, the program was shelved. Today, in this country, almost 40 years later, the gap between rich and poor is still widening. The idea of a basic income guarantee, or BIG, is back on the table in this province, and Senator Hugh Segal is making it his retirement project. What other way, I ask you, given the present economic discrepancies, will there ever be a jubilee in this land? And I won't even go to how we're going to have jubilee in the county. Or what about this story? The mayor of Medicine Hat, Alberta, was involved in conversation around the city's homelessness. To make a long story short, what he learned, and he admits it was a big conversion for him, was that if you want to get people off the street, you needed to give them a home, not a job, not a check, not a drug or alcohol rehab, but a home. Because without a bed to sleep in or a roof over their head, they were never going to get around to finding that job, or getting off alcohol, or consistently taking their medication if they were mentally ill. I've done the math, he said, and he admitted that he didn't believe it at first, but giving homeless people homes, in fact, cost the system less than when they were on the streets. Another jubilee story. Another story about reversing the trend and lifting people up so that they can reintegrate into society, and then we're all healthier. It shall be jubilee for you. You shall return, every one of you, to your property, and every one of you to your family. Wow. What a declaration. Given the movement of so many people throughout the world because of war or violence or famine, wouldn't a proclamation of a return to home be a welcoming one? Given all of those who are victims of human trafficking, the modern day world for slavery, wouldn't that freedom to return to one's family be a deep word of healing and hope? Stories like the Highland clearances and 100 other versions of it have occurred and continue to occur throughout history. They are testimony to a civilization gone off track, and the biblical vision, well aware of said reality, insisted that if people couldn't play fair with one another, or if the land, that a year of reversal would be legislated. Every 49 years, the playing field would be leveled again. The absolute opposite of what happened throughout Scotland in the 18th and 19th century. So if this annual event at St. Andrews is to mean anything more than a trip down memory lane for the sake of a bit of nostalgia or clan loyalty, then we need to take seriously the biblical mandate of Jubilee. The people of Israel concluded that if their religion was to have any relevance whatsoever, it needed to have economic and political implications. It needed to have a way of addressing the worst kind of suffering, which is the loss of home. And so every year on this occasion, the circle of friends and the extended circles of friends around St. Andrews recall how our ancestors in faith acted with defiance in the face of abusive power. We remember on this day the enormity of suffering caused by that abusive power. And finally, we remember our obligation to ensure that the land we call home is a land that finds creative ways to practice Jubilee. Whether it's in Dauphin, Manitoba, or Medicine Hat, Alberta, or Picton, Ontario. We can never forget that many seeking refuge in this land 200 years ago were victims of forced displacement. And if the dead could speak, I suspect that they would insist that here in Canada, we must seek ways to ensure that a more just and equitable balance is maintained, not just for us, but for everyone. I invite you now, during this time for contemplation, to consider how this story of Jubilee speaks to you. How might it have spoken to the yearnings of the Highlanders? And finally, as we are all reflecting on what it means to be Canadians in this 150th year, how might it serve as a lesson as we continue to lay the foundations for how we intend to live as global citizens in this century?